Welcome to the Bayesian Conspiracy. I'm Eneasz Brodsky.
I'm Steven Zuber.
I'm Jay Sticky.
And today we have a guest with us, Lucien Greaves from the Satanic Temple.
Yay.
Say hello, Lucien.
Hello, how are you?
I think we're doing all right.
Yeah.
Hanging in there.
Yeah. It's shaping up to be a better year now for the past few days.
So far, so good.
Yes.
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
It'd be hard to be worse, but
yeah.
I don't want to tempt anything.
No, I mean, your wife got a vaccine, so
Yep.
a little bit closer.
Frontline worker, we're getting there.
Yeah.
Anyway, I don't really know where to start. I think anything you want to tell us about yourself and how you came to be involved, and really if someone bumped into you and asked, what do you do and what is the Satanic Temple? I think a from the ground starting point would be really interesting.
Oh, yeah. Well, sometimes I'm on flights or whatever, and people will ask what I do. And, it's funny how that one still catches me off guard. Sometimes I tell them because that shuts them up more than anything else. But I also found that if I tell people that I run a nonprofit, they tend not to ask what the nonprofit is all about. So I guess that sounds sufficiently boring that people don't follow up with it. But I'm co-founder of and spokesperson for the Satanic Temple.
Now, I find that really interesting that people don't follow up because, like, if someone was running a nonprofit, my first question would be like, yeah.
I'd be so interested. Like, oh, what kind? Like, Oh.
I can't think of a time where somebody's asked what the nonprofit was all about. I think
they must be just doing the thing of asking, like, hey, how are you? And they don't really care. Like, what do you do? Oh, cool.
Or maybe they think he just said a nonprofit. He doesn't want to talk about it.
Oh, I suppose that could be.
Yeah, that's probably part of it.
Huh.
So if I did follow up and say, well, what nonprofit do you run and what do you guys do?
Oh, I'd say the Satanic Temple, and we fuck up theocrats.
Delightful.
Nice. Yeah. So I'm assuming at least some portion of our listeners will already be familiar with this, but for those who aren't, the Satanic Temple is, I'm a big fan, but you guys don't believe in a literal Satan, which is so far the case I found in every sect of Satanism that I have had contact with. None of them believe in a literal Satan, but or in your case, any supernatural powers at all. My first question was going to be like, what do you like about the mythological Satan so much that you named your organization after him?
Well, I think there's a real power in these fundamental myths, whether we believe in them literally or not. We grow up steeped in this culture where it kind of sets the framework, I think, for some of our basic fundamental ideas. These archetypes stick with us, one way or the other. And it makes the imagery very powerful. It makes the content of the mythological framework very powerful. And it also has this kind of intuitive appeal because we have this kind of sense that, the ultimate rebel against tyranny is Satan, So people ask, like, why Satan? Couldn't you pick something else? And the answer just really is no. Nothing else could really take the place of that for us. It's really entrenched in our consciousness, and people either get that or they don't. Some people never quite grasp why it would be important to us when we're non-theistic, and other people see it right away. I guess it just depends on where you come from, and how much exposure one might have had with these things in their own lives. But I think now, currently, seeing the overreach of Christian nationalists, at least in the United States, a lot more people than otherwise would have, I think, do intuitively understand the value in what we're doing and the power and the meaning behind the myth of Satan.
I think there's also probably like a lot of branding power there too. If it was the Church of Thor, like I don't think it would make headlines as much as the Satanic Temple wants to put a statue in this courthouse or something, right? Like
that's true. Yeah, that's why
the theocrats you're fighting are largely Christians, so they already have to tacitly acknowledge the existence of Satan, right?
Right. And I'm mystified about how many emails we get from people saying, wouldn't you get a lot further if it wasn't Satan? And I'm pretty sure we wouldn't. A lot of the earlier attention we got was obviously because of the clickbait value in saying, Satanists are doing this, or, Satanists are objecting to, something some Christian theocratic group was doing. It's something that people can read in like all of like 5 words.
Uh-oh. I think we just lost him.
Oh, he'll be back probably, although we might have to start over.
Okay, there we go. I'm sorry. I think the last thing you said was that you don't think you would have had better results going with a different name?
No, saying that Satanists are fighting for equal placement or whatever, that's very given to clickbaity headlines that wouldn't be as effective if it were something else. And of course, that's not to say that's the reason we're Satanists. It's not. It really has to do with that, fundamental basic power and these kinds of entrenched myths we have in our culture, but also just, people saying that we do better if we could just call ourselves something else, I think is misguided as well.
I also think too, like there's at least among some fringe, in theocratic circles that like, oh, you atheists are all Satan worshippers, and it's like, all right, fine, we'll fucking own it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's funny.
Like, no, that's not us, it's those guys.
I used to be accused of being a Satanist before I came out in the open as a self-identified Satanist, and now the detractors hardly say anything about that. They can't. They don't bother to some of them don't bother anymore to try to tell people what Satanism really means. Oddly, they'll claim that we're either not authentic Satanists or that we're something else entirely. We're working at the behest of George Soros, or even at the completely opposite end. Yeah, but there's also the completely opposite end of the spectrum too, where it's like we're secretly these crypto-fascist Nazis as well.
Oh, that's interesting.
If only one of those was true, you'd be getting bankrolled from somewhere, right?
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
So I'm kind of curious, is the name more like of an outward-facing thing for the effect on the public, or is it more of an internal identity sort of thing? Or is it both? I mean, I'm assuming it's both, but like which one would be more important to you personally?
Well, I think as a religious community, it's important, of course, that this has internal meaning to the people who are adherents of it. And when you see our chapters, our membership, the events they do, and, journalists have noticed this, and more academic authors who've explored new religions and started growing interested in what's happening with the Satanic Temple, noticing that we actually do have this community that has these internal activities, ceremonies, rituals, and things like that aren't at all public facing, and that this entire thing is acting as a religion should for anybody who's a religious adherent. It definitely takes the place of religion for the people who are practicing it within the Satanic Temple. I have no reason why somebody would, I have no reason to believe that we're lacking anything as a religion, even though some people can't wrap their head around non-theism. So the internal meaning it has for people who are adherents of it, I think that's of primary importance. But that being said, the outward appearance isn't something that troubles us either. And like I said before, I feel like the fact that we're Satanists really gives people this impression that they have some understanding of what this is, or makes them interested in where we're coming from. So if if there's some motivation to draw eyes to news stories or whatever, this certainly doesn't subtract from it either.
Did you have for?
I'm curious whether, I guess, any of your adherents or people that you've run into on, you were saying, like, on a flight have been genuine believers in Satan, and what like that interaction was like?
Well, it doesn't take people long when they come to the Satanic Temple to note that we're non-theistic, and people are always really quick to point that out if there's any mistake that anybody has there. And we have sometimes gotten angry theistic Satanists getting outraged, saying we're misrepresenting their beliefs or whatever, which are based on nothing quite clear. There isn't really a widely recognized theistic satanic Bible or organization that I can really think of. There was the Temple of Set, which took a theistic frame of mind on things. Not terribly large now, though. I don't know how active they are, especially now that their founder is dead.
And that's the Egyptian Set.
Yeah, and that was a spin-off from the Church of Satan, which was quasi non-theistic. They seem to have very confusing mixed messages when it comes to magic and supernaturalism, and they claim to be atheistic, but they also claim that they do rituals that harness supernormal powers and things like that. So they seem to kind of have constructed their message to whatever audience they're speaking to at the time. But I don't think any of those movements are terribly large, and it's always hard to know who's just a random person on social media and who is actually representative of a community.
Yeah. I sort of love the idea of just like a disappointed, like heavy metal dude leaving, like,
I was supposed to get awesome axe shredding powers.
I brought my dead baby and everything.
Well, a lot of those messages come from countries infested by Western missionaries who've been fed this idea that they can sell their soul for wealth in the real world, wealth and fame, and they're willing to do it because they're in a desperate state. So we do often get emails from people offering to sell their soul to the Illuminati for money and things like that.
Oh, damn.
That's like upsetting, but like I'm hoping that like you can actually point them towards like genuine resources.
Yeah.
Like, hey, here's like,
yeah, but it is alarming to see how we're exporting the worst elements of our culture to other places.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. What about like running into theists who believe in Satan? Like, has anyone ever like run away from you or like tried to pray at you or anything strange like that?
Yeah, I've if people recognize me, and that hasn't happened in some 10 months now because I've stayed in through the course of the entire pandemic.
Mm.
But if people recognize me and they're going to say anything, that's typically because they approve of what I'm doing and are happy that they saw me. So I probably don't notice, the negative responses as much because they're quiet. But I went to the gym one time in Salem, and some guy really was insistent at praying for me and asking my permission to pray for me. And and I was telling him, like, you can do what you want to do, but I'm not having any part of this, But he was really pushy about it to the point where I had to tell him to fuck off. And I feel like it was a case of him recognizing who I was, and things like that happen. And and I'm not clear as to whether it was because they recognized me or just because they're deranged people. That's
Right.
the thing. That's the thing about being somebody who could be recognized now. Now, if somebody's staring at me really weird, I'm not sure if they're just a weird person or if they have some ideas that came to them from having seen me in some other context.
So the thing to move forward, this is the thing that got me really interested in the Satanic Temple was when you funded the Baphomet statue, which I don't even remember how many years ago now that was. But I jumped in on that Kickstarter, and that was... I'm still like really happy about that and sometimes talk about it. But the Baphomet statue, like really briefly, is sort of a goat-headed aspect of Satan sitting on a throne with two kids on either side of him. Kids as in human children, not goat children. And it's just kind of like a religious monument, right? It's not overtly evil or anything. The kids look to be looking up to him. He's, got this sort of wise look on his face as far as you can tell with a goat. But
a very sage-looking goat.
Yes. But it was originally a response to I forget which city it was that was allowing religious monuments in one of their public parks, and it was all getting Christian monuments. Is that correct?
Well, it was Oklahoma, and Oklahoma had some of those spineless lackeys in their in the House who were pushing through model legislation penned by the Congressional Prayer Caucus or some other arm of Project Blitz, where you have these well-financed, well-networked theocratic groups throughout the United States, and they'll pen model legislation, and they'll give this model legislation to their mindless pawns in other states who just fill in the blanks, sign off on it, and pass these laws. So we saw a Ten Commandments bill passed in Oklahoma, where they made the argument that putting a privately donated and financed Ten Commandments monument on the Capitol grounds wouldn't be a breach of the Establishment Clause because it's privately financed and privately donated, and it's not government speech at that point. But of course, that means they've opened those Capitol grounds to other private donations. So we said, well, we'll donate a satanic monument on the Capitol grounds, and they can't engage in viewpoint discrimination and say we're not putting this up because it's satanic and the other one is Christian. And this was very early on, like 2013, when the Satanic Temple was just getting started. And at that point, we're mostly just a couple of guys trying to let people know the vision we have for this. So when we jumped into the fray in Oklahoma, we weren't really ready. We just sent a letter to the Secretary of State's office, I think it was, in Oklahoma, and said we wanted to donate a monument. And I think there was an exploratory letter, I think, asking for more information or the proper forms that we would fill out to do this. And we didn't expect that just sending that letter was going to bring us media attention. But the very idea struck people at the time. Now I think more people do these kinds of things because we've done them, and we're expected to do these things now. So it might not be as big of a news story, but just having sent that letter drew this media attention. So we had to hurry up and put together crowdfunding because we had no idea how much this would cost. When we sent that letter, we didn't even have a monument design idea yet. So we set up crowdfunding for like $20,000, which was, ridiculously lowballing it just because we didn't know at the time. But we also were really desperate to raise that money because we didn't have financing, and we didn't want to bluff with anything. When we originally formed the Satanic Temple, we wanted to be clear that we weren't going to send out demand letters and things like that unless we intended on following through, and we wanted to make it clear with everything we did that we would follow through. We wanted to gain that reputation because we knew it would be way too easy to think that this was just a prank and that we would let things stand at a letter itself, So we're desperately scrambling to get the monument together, and of course that included coming up with the monument design. And really, we wanted the design to address all the claims behind the Ten Commandments monument. They were saying the Ten Commandments monument served a secular purpose, that it somehow stood for American values, judicial values, because based on this erroneous idea that constitutional law was somehow based on these biblical laws, the Ten Commandments. And
and thou shalt have no other gods before me just screams secularism.
right, yeah. And thou shalt not speak the Lord's name in vain. That's that in no way contradicts the First Amendment, I guess. There's there's a lot of bad arguments there, but we feel like we made a monument that actually could use those arguments. We said that this stands as homage to those who have been unjustly persecuted in witch hunts that have helped inform the fundamental bases of secular law, innocence until proven guilty, material evidence, that kind of thing. And also, the binary elements of the Baphomet monument, the part animal, part human, pointing above and below, the inverted pentagram, and the pentacle straight up. They were indicative of the reconciliation of opposites, pluralism, viewpoint neutrality, and diversity. These kinds of First Amendment values, and
Baphomet's
furthermore,
also depicted as hermaphroditic in, like, I guess the more not safe for work, like you see on tarot, etc. So the binary gender thing as well.
Oh well,
that would be hard to pull off on the statue, but
right, and that was the subject of a lot of debate. We knew people would, we knew we would get pushback and complaints about taking off the breasts, but also working with the artists, working with a covered chest looked terrible artistically, and we just knew the bared breasts would have changed the entire argument. They would have said it had nothing to do with religious discrimination. They just weren't going to allow, this pornography on the grounds. And I feel like, it is worth arguing that there's nothing pornographic about that, but we weren't going to allow that to become the extra step into getting to the core argument that this was viewpoint discrimination. They didn't want the monument there because of Satanism. So we went with the Iggy Pop torso, or the artist went, molding based on Iggy Pop, the torso of this Baphomet monument. And we also made it very clear that we did not want our monument there in isolation. Our monument was meant to be there on grounds where the Ten Commandments monument was standing, or other religious monuments, because we wanted it to be a monument to pluralism, and to complete that picture, there needed to be other viewpoints, right? So at the point where the Supreme Court of Oklahoma decided that the Ten Commandments monument was, in fact, illegal and needed to come down, and they took down the Ten Commandments monument, we withdrew our demand to have the Baphomet monument placed on those grounds. And then we moved the fight directly over to Arkansas, where another mindless clone of a senator just signed off on model legislation. Jason Rapert in Arkansas, just acting as a tool for larger theocratic organizations, pushed through the same model legislation that was used in Oklahoma, same arguments, except in the case of Oklahoma, they didn't deny our requests; they just ignored them. In Arkansas, they straight up denied us any placement on the public grounds. The senator there, Rapert, has gone on these tirades about how it'll be a cold day in hell before there's a satanic monument on the Capitol grounds, failing to mention now that we did a rally, and this is kind of the climactic scene in the documentary Hail Satan, where we brought the Baphomet monument on the Capitol grounds for a day, and we had a rally. We gave our speeches. We confronted people with Confederate flags and shitheaded neo-Nazis who called upon all white Christians to show up and protest our event and that kind of thing. And it's funny because when we did that, you had these politicians in Arkansas saying that, yeah, we have a right to assemble, we have a right to do this rally, there's nothing we can do about it, but it'll be a cold day in hell before our monument is on the Capitol grounds. And it's like, what do they think is the legal distinction there between us having the access to the Capitol grounds for a rally and us having access to the Capitol grounds for that kind of free expression that they're allowing for other private groups? Is it, I guess they just, to me, it kind of invalidates their claim that they have a right at all to say that we don't have a right to put the monument on the public grounds. But it just seems like they feel that they have some kind of right to put limits where they feel appropriate. And I just feel it's indicative of having people in public office who have absolutely no understanding of either the letter or the spirit of the law.
I loved how it really pointed out the hypocrisy behind those sorts of movements, because this was still during the time of, the atheism religious conflicts, and people would just say, look, no, it's privately funded. We're just allowing people to exercise their free speech on the Capitol grounds. The government isn't getting involved at all. And obviously they have tons of people with lots of money that want to put up their Christian bullshit. But then the second that someone comes over with a religion that they find, distasteful, it's like, oh no, you can't do that. And it shows it was always about promoting their religion on the Capitol, on the government property, and nothing at all to do with just giving people the freedom to speak.
Yeah, and there's so many disingenuous arguments that came through the course of this whole thing from Arkansas's side of this. The senator Rapert kept saying that because it was privately donated and privately funded, that none of this was coming at any cost to the taxpayers of Arkansas. And he knew he was full of shit from the start. He knew that this was going to provoke various lawsuits, right? And I kind of feel like there should be a smell test on these little individual crusades put forth by senators and Congress people, lawmakers of any type, where they want to push through something that gives exclusive preference to their religious voice. And I feel like if there's no real compelling state interest to do something like this, and you can reasonably assume there's going to be expensive litigation, constitutional claims against it, I feel like it really should come at their cost somehow. There should be some kind of censure against them for pursuing these kinds of agendas, because as it stands now, there's no harm in it to them, and it's no cost to them either. Rapert made a ton of money off of crowdfunding for his Ten Commandments monument. He way overfunded for it. That monument costs like $18,000 to $20,000. He crowdfunded for $100,000. The
Wasn't it
first
just a
one
rectangle
was,
with the words on it too?
yeah, the first one was run over by a car. A born again Christian smashed into it.
I love that
Yeah,
detail.
right. And he tried to blame us. He tried to say that he was publicly exploring the options of using some kind of obscure anti-terrorism bill to say that we had promoted this idea that the Ten Commandments monument should come down, so we were some kind of terroristic overlords in this born again Christian crashing into the Ten Commandments monument. And I think by the standards the Secretary of State has in Arkansas, that it should have been insured, right? But he starts crowdfunding for it anyway, so he's just rolling in the dough. And then after it was run over, they put up these security bollards, these big kind of concrete pillars on 4 points surrounding the Ten Commandments monument, so it couldn't get taken out by a car again. And I'm not sure, but I think that was paid for by the state. But I am sure that the case is being defended by the not the Secretary of State's office, but the Attorney General's office in Arkansas. So the people of Arkansas are paying for this meaningless litigation to put forward Pastor Senator Rapert's little crusade in Arkansas, and all the while he's profiting from it. And there's going to be no consequence for him at the point where the courts say that the Ten Commandments monument has to come down, which they almost certainly will.
Oh, I didn't realize that was still in litigation.
Yeah, it's still in litigation. We were supposed to have a July hearing, and it got delayed due to COVID. And now they're just kind of sitting on some motions that the judge needs to rule on. and it's taken a really long time now. Everything just kind of got held up by COVID, and then just seemed to grind to a halt. But that case is still moving forward, and I'm still very confident about that one. Rapert has been so stupid in the way he's presented his case, and he's been so open about the religious purpose and meaning of the Ten Commandments monument. He hasn't displayed any of the savvy of somebody who's aware of the legal angle he's trying to work in the bill he signed off on. You know, he sometimes throws in some some terminology about heritage and history, the secular purpose of the monument and stuff like that. But that doesn't work when, on Sundays you're at the pulpit as a guest speaker in various churches talking about bringing the gospel to the public square and making sure that we have godly leaders within the United States and things like that. I mean, you're not giving the courts anything to work with, even if they're inclined to find in your favor.
Yeah, I like the idea of there should be a smell test required before the government can endorse, and Baphomet acting as that sort of smell test.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it doesn't even have to be Baphomet. Like I said, I think it's simple enough that, if there's no compelling state interest and you can reasonably expect these kinds of constitutional claims, I really don't think I really don't think lawmakers should get away with pushing that kind of agenda then.
Yeah. Jace, did you have some?
I was just honestly wondering if like some Hindu church wanted to put a statue of Ganesh, whether they would have fought back against it as virulently. Like, it's
I think that's
on one hand, it's like I think that's sort of almost like sort of attacking it from two angles. If you could, it would be fun to see if you could like partner with some genuine church that wanted to put like, I don't know, a Buddha statue or something.
Well, interestingly, there was a Hindu church that made its presence known during the Oklahoma thing, and they might have sent a letter during Arkansas as well. But their problem is they didn't follow up, and it appears that they didn't intend to. It seems like they took the tactic of writing the letter and thinking that would be enough, and it's not. In Oklahoma, they were ignored like we were, but the fact that they had put in the request generated interest, support, and in media attention as well. The next time they came around, I think people were aware that they hadn't followed through before. There wasn't a monument to show for this, or it was overshadowed by the fact that we clearly could be counted on to show up and see it through, because everybody knows we have our monument and it's on the move, and we're ready to plant it on the Capitol grounds.
I think that's one of the big advantages of being the Church of Satan or the Satanic Temple rather than some other religion, is that a lot of Christians just find it inherently offensive, and so they're going to push back in a way that they wouldn't against like Hindus. And like
it would have been really awkward though watching them try to push back against a genuine church. Like I'm like really curious about the counterfactual or like the alternate universe where there's okay, well we'll put our Buddha here and we'll have Ganesh over here, and then we can have some Islamic thing over here to like wait.
I think
well, here's some news for you though. We are a genuine church. We're federally recognized. We are IRS exempt. We we tick all the boxes. And when we took a case to the court in Scottsdale, we were arguing about city council meeting prayers. In Scottsdale, we had offered to give an invocation before a city council meeting, where usually they open up with a Christian prayer, and they wouldn't let us do it. They rescinded the offer. We had put in to do it, and they signed off on it because that's what they're supposed to do. And they're not supposed to evaluate whether they want a certain religious group or not. They open that door, right? And instead, the city council got all pissed off. They rescinded the offer to have us give the invocation, and it was very clearly based on religious animus. So we we pursued this lawsuit. We took it to trial in Scottsdale. And Scottsdale was trying to argue the entire time, even though we recognized by the IRS as a church, tax exempt. Scottsdale was trying to argue that we're not, that this is something other than a religious organ or whatever it was. So just that we didn't deserve to be called an actual religion or church, and therefore our claim of religious discrimination had no merit. And the court found in our favor then too, and said, they very clearly are an actual religion by legal standards. But the court also went on to say that we hadn't sufficiently proven that it was religious animus that drove the decision to rescind our invitation to give the invocation at Scottsdale, and that we had some greater burden of proof to meet, that it wasn't just some kind of administrative decision based on I don't know. It was a really bad decision in any case in that part, and we're appealing it. But even in that case, they didn't care to hear arguments that we're not a legitimate religion.
Yeah, I think that is some extreme bullshit. Like, I personally, in my feeling, like Satanism feels like a real religion, like genuine or whatever. But I also think that the religious animus is kind of the whole point, right? Like you are being discriminated against because of religious animus, and the thing is, like, they don't have that animus for things like Hinduism or Buddhism, and so they don't get, like, there are people that have been genuinely harmed by Christianity, and that seeing those 10 commandments or having a Christian prayer forced on you before a Senate meeting, like, is infuriating. And I wouldn't say like harmful, because that's a bullshit term, but it's infuriating, and it's damaging to democracy, and it divides the population. And I think, like, letting them see that from the other side, like, what's it like when a religion that you have great distaste for is pushed by the government? Oh, this is a bad thing, we shouldn't do it in a democracy. It's an important message, in my opinion, to get through to people. And so, like, I think you're doing great work in helping people see that, and helping to keep the separation of church and state strong by showing people why it's important to keep them separate.
Well, I think it is from the perspective of the public understanding of what it means to live in a pluralistic democracy. It is harmful for them to be putting forward their religious message to the exclusion of other religious messages. And you can see that harm, what harm has been done in the mainstream reactions to what the Satanic Temple does. When people are outraged and say that it's ludicrous that we should expect to have the right to do the things we're doing when we're just asking for equal access, it shows that people have lost all sense of what religious liberty means, of what the Constitution is, and those kind of guiding ethics of pluralism and democratic ideals. It shows that people really feel that we're a Christian nation, and that they do have some kind of exclusive licensing over the public domain, and that I think is dangerous, and I think that's contributed in part to some of the worst elements we've seen of the past 4 years, up to and including this siege of the Capitol, which was in no small part in effort of theocratic militants.
Stephen, you had something?
It goes back a bit, but like the idea of having this bulwark to raise up as a legal and
symbolic.
It's symbolic and ideological, counterpoint to the let's raise up our this one religion, let's put this one above in whatever context, whether it's after school programs or public monuments or whatever. It sort of brings to mind the flying spaghetti monster, which that might have come out right around when I was in high school. I can't quite remember. But the Satanic Temple is, you said 2013, 2014 was when it was getting off the ground?
Yes, correct.
So in the last, I guess, half decade or so, has there been a move to, like, I mean, I don't know any high schoolers. Is this the kind of thing that is as is this known about, like, as well as, I have no idea how popular the flying spaghetti monster was either, but at least
I
I've
still
seen,
see it on car like bumper
yeah,
stickers.
I see
so-
bumper stickers. I wasn't the only kid in my school with the book. Is there? I know that you guys do some community outreach, especially with kids. Is this being brought up like more and more now, or do you have any feedback on from current young people?
When I first started speaking to undergrads, I was like any time I was first doing public lectures or whatever, I expected a lot of pushback in a lot of people to just think of Satanism in terms of what they learned during the Satanic Panic. You know, this idea that there's infant sacrifice and blood orgies and that kind of thing. And what I found from the undergraduate crowd is that they would hear what I was saying and they would assimilate that, and they would think, and they would just respond like, okay, now I know something about this. That sounds great. You know, they didn't have, I don't think, a lot of them, that background understanding of the Satanic Panic. They didn't
Right.
have generally those prejudices about what Satanism is supposed to be in their minds. So they're hearing a Satanist speak for the first time, so they were just saying, oh, okay, that sounds great. That's what this is about. Sign me up. And I was you know, I was kind of shocked by that. You know, people, the people who would just understand what we were on our own terms and be willing to accept that was an initial shock for me. And I think, you know, in that crowd also, we didn't have a whole lot of people saying, oh, okay, I get the joke, which is sometimes something we get too. You know, people coming to us and saying, like, hey, I get it. This is hilarious. Because I think that misses the mark too. You know, we genuinely view this as you know, a non-theistic religion, and people, you know, our membership of ours really identify with this. And it's not like once they get away from the cameras or the public or something, they take off their horns and say, oh, okay, now I can get back to who I really am, or something like that, you know. And I feel like the flying spaghetti monster in people's minds, you know, has that element to it where it's like, okay, obviously these things are being done all in satire or whatever. And not to say that that doesn't develop into a real genuine community, and that the values they're advocating for aren't things that they're advocating for because they genuinely believe in those values. Just the symbolic structure and things like that genuinely do seem arbitrary, you know, and in that way it's different. And I do think the Flying Spaghetti Monster did have some legal rulings against their authenticity, if I remember correctly.
That rings a bell. You know, I don't remember any real value judgments or proposals that they made. I just remember it being the you know, anti-intelligent design in the biology classroom argument. If they had a moral thesis, I mean, like, your guys' 7 commandments are tight, and like those are rules to live by. If the Flying Spaghetti Monster, Monsterism, or Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, whatever, if they had any value statements like that, they didn't hit my radar. But yeah, like I know you had a couple things on some of the um, the 7 commandments. So I'll let you jump in, Enosh, if you felt like it. But I like all of them. I mean, this is, you know, there's, I don't want to, we can't just read them, but anyone can go to the satanictemple.com and check them out. But I mean, rule number 1, if I, and like, I'll make my, I won't let myself read all of them. But I mean, if I was writing a list of rules for guiding humans through, you know, giving them a good moral foundation, you know, I think that the first one makes perfect sense. One should strive to act with compassion and empathy towards all creatures in accordance with reason. Like that. If I could give one moral virtue to humanity, that sounds like it in a nutshell, right? That's awesome.
Yeah, there's, to explore the philosophy of the 7 tenets deeper. It's interesting to look around and see some of the commentary about them. Recently, there was a Catholic podcast that went through finding faults with with the 7 tenets, and it, and I think they were doing that, you know, trying to find like the hidden meaning, and in a lot of ways they were fairly fair, but still there's this notion that there's something deeper behind this here, and that so a certain reading of one or the other gives you license to commit the worst kind of acts possible, and you really kind of have to stretch to find that meaning. But
Yeah,
we
you
don't.
really got to squint at the first one. In accordance with reason. You mean an exclusion to love? That's bullshit, man. I meant I got to apologize for something. I said 7 commandments. These are different. These are 7 tenets, and tenets should not be considered being commanded to do something. This is the.
I find it hilarious that a Catholic would go on, like, they have the 10 commandments. Like, what better example of pull the rafter out of your own eye before you go after the speck in someone else's do you need?
Well, it's funny because in some ways they're not dishonest. They'll openly talk about the how the lack of subservience in these tenets is indicative of a lack of moral foundation, because to their minds you have to be subservient to a divine power which acts as the ultimate moral authority, or else you're just floating free from any ethical framework, and you're going to run out in rape and murder with mindless abandon unless you have some punishing supernatural entity to tell you otherwise.
Yeah.
Make their own choices, develop their own ethical frameworks.
I want to, well, in a second, in just a moment, I want to pivot to a next thing. But before that, I kind of get the impression that, like, doing all this, you sort of have to play like the bad guys in the public eye. But it also kind of feels that with a name like Satanism, that's sort of your jam. Is this as fun and fulfilling as it looks? Because I think I would be having a blast if I was doing that. But I don't know. I wanted your opinion.
It's hard to say. I mean, sometimes it feels really good. It's great, especially when you feel like with anything, it feels like you're making progress or whatever. But other times, it's been really, really stressful and really a nightmare. And in some ways, it's unnecessary what a nightmare it's been. It's just part of my character that, especially early on, I had no interest being on TV, having articles written, being an interview subject, that kind of thing. I'm a pretty private person and pretty introverted by nature as well. So that whole part of it was a really hard adjustment for me. And then when you're just controversial, right? I had a real I had a real background in investigating the satanic panic of the 80s and 90s. So I was well aware of how accusations of Satanism leveled against people who had nothing to do with Satanism nonetheless ruined those people's lives. So it felt like suicide to publicly be a face of Satanism. It felt like any moment now the bizarre accusations are going to roll in. Somebody's going to try to find me and shoot me and stuff like that. And that's never quite gone away either. but otherwise, I feel like in a lot of ways, this has kind of played out to the best case scenario. It would have been hard to imagine back in 2013 that now we would have some like 250,000 members in this kind of general recognition that we have, and that CNN would have done a 45-minute documentary that fairly presented us, and that a Sundance documentary that did well in 2019 would accurately portray the Satanic Temple as well. That's all very good stuff.
Where can we see that documentary, Hail Satan?
Damn, at this point, I'm not sure. I think it's still on Hulu, but it's also available for rent or purchase on YouTube and other streaming sites. It's distributed by Magnolia Films, and I'm hoping we get it on TST TV. We have our own streaming platform also. I encourage you to check that out.
That's awesome. All I know what I'm watching tonight.
So the next thing that I wanted to move to was longtime listeners of the podcast will know that I am like on the extreme far fringe of pro-choice beyond most people. And so this was something that like was of intense interest to me. You recently, I think last year, introduced a satanic abortion ritual in order to hopefully help circumvent some of the really restrictive state laws on getting abortions. I believe that, what was it? This is based on the Supreme Court's Hobby Lobby decision that affirms an individual's right to object to laws that violate their religious beliefs. And the fact that the third of the 7 tenets states that one's body is inviolable and subject to one's will alone. Could you briefly explain the ritual and what this entails, what it is?
Yeah, sure. First and foremost, the ritual was meant to uh, give a type of emotional support to somebody seeking to terminate their pregnancy. And to that end, we put together a formal ritual which involves reciting the relevant tenets and going over things with another participant who's taking the ministerial role of putting the pregnant person through this kind of counseling session and affirming that this was done with the individual's best scientific understanding and in no way contradictory to our tenets and reaffirming that the body is inviolable, subject to one's own will alone. And our perspective that the fetus, the non-viable fetus, is a part of the woman, and it's her choice to do as she will. And part of that ritual um, is having the procedure done itself. Of course, the people performing the procedure aren't asked to change any of their behavior, recite any lines that coincide with the ritual. It's just part of the process of the person who's terminating their pregnancy, who's a member of the Satanic Temple. And then there is a kind of exit counseling session after the procedure is done. But because the process of terminating the fetus is part of the ritual itself, it would be a violation of our religious liberty to ask us to have any roadblocks placed between the ritual being carried out as it's supposed to be by our standards and getting it done. The that's really the core of the argument, right? They can't tell us that we have to wait 72 hours or whatever else. Any of these weasel restrictions they keep trying to force in to make it more prohibitive to be able to get an abortion done. We feel like we have a really good legal argument here, and we're willing to pursue that, of course. I also see that, again, model legislation being put forth by pawns to outside theocratic organizations. They're doing the burial bills. They passed it in Ohio recently, where they're saying that a fetus must be given a proper burial, and uh, these are this adds another prohibitive expense to getting the abortion done, and that's the point. They want to make it really difficult for an abortion to happen. They want to prevent as many abortions as they can from happening. And to that end, they're doing things like insisting that a fetus be buried, be given a proper burial, and that I think in Ohio at least it says that if the person who terminated the pregnancy isn't willing to pay for the proper burial, then the facility that performed the action needs to be willing to do that. And I feel like we have a very strong legal argument here as a religion also, because I hard pressed to find a time where burial rites didn't fall in with the purview of religious belief, perspective, and in need. And to our end, on our end, being made to acknowledge this Christian viewpoint that the fetus is a unique individual human life, one deserving a proper burial rather than being disposed of as biological waste. I feel like that's a real intrusion into our own religious rights, and I feel like that's a very strong lawsuit waiting to happen.
Yeah, is there even is there a law that an adult needs to have a proper burial? Like, where is this coming from?
Yeah, I don't. That is a good question. I haven't looked at that, but I would think that if you were, you know, if your grandfather died or something, and the family was to say, "Can you just dispose of him as you would dispose of any other biohazardous waste?" that they would shovel them into a crematorium, right? I don't know. It does seem like they're making standards up just
I
to fight this abortion battle.
I only have like a cursory understanding of the Hobby Lobby decision, and I know you're not a lawyer, but do you know like how that interacts here?
Well, the Hobby Lobby ruling uh, did us some good when it came to these arguments, because previously we felt like we could be going through some very expensive litigation that came down to the court's understanding of science, and that would mean that we would need to play this game in which we had to have dueling expert witnesses, which would get very costly. And in the case of Hobby Lobby, they did a couple things. For one thing, the court essentially abdicated any reasoning on which they would in which they would adjudge the authenticity of a religious claim. I mean, it's very questionable that a corporate entity can say that they hold religious beliefs. In that the how they treat their employees who might not
Mind of Hobby
subscribe to
Lobby.
those beliefs need to somehow fall in line with that. But the key thing that Hobby Lobby did was that it said that Hobby Lobby's claim that certain contraceptive drugs that were not abortifacients, in fact, were abortifacients because they believed them to be abortifacients,
Oh my god.
was a matter of belief, in that they were free to believe that and act upon those beliefs, and the court wasn't going to question that. So science didn't matter. So even while we feel we have science on our side, it's a relief to know that we don't even have to fight that battle at all, but can walk in and say it's a matter of belief on our part, and that's the end of the story.
Hmm. So I was following the satanic abortion ritual because I'm really interested in that, and it seems like the courts in general are treating this one different. Like the other two cases, Scottsdale and the Baphomet stuff, and the memorial for the war dead. Those were all like seem to have good legal standing. Like people argued over it, and the abortion ritual seems to have been more or less just denied out of hand. Like this, a lot of courts wouldn't even look at it. The Supreme Court turned it down. I was wondering. It almost seems something you said earlier struck me that that the state doesn't have any compelling interest to promote one religion over another. And I think maybe this is being treated differently because a lot of people do feel that the state has a compelling interest in regulating abortion, even outside of a religious context. But I don't know. That's just kind of like my gut feeling. Do you have any idea as to why this seems to be being treated differently than the other movements?
Yeah, but first let me say we haven't litigated the abortion ritual. Um, what we were litigating previously was in Missouri. They had a 72-hour waiting period um, before somebody could get an abortion, that required that the person wanting to get an abortion would go into the clinic, receive materials that state that they understand that the act of getting an abortion is going to kill a unique individual human life. And so somebody's supposed to get these materials and then ponder them for like 72 hours before going back and getting this done. And in Missouri, there was like one clinic, and sometimes people would travel like upward of 6 hours to get there. Have to miss work, pay for the travel, get lodging or whatever. So that 72 hours was not a small burden in certain cases. And it turns out a lot of people getting abortions already have kids. I think that's something a lot of the conservatives don't understand, is people generally aren't just using it as birth control, as they like to think. So there's a lot of factors here that made the 72 hours a really prohibitive weasel bill against abortion. So we put together an exemption form for members of the Satanic Temple seeking an abortion, saying that, because this statement in these materials regarding an individual and unique human life contradicts our own religious viewpoint that the non-viable fetus is tissue, and that it's up to the person who is pregnant to decide the meaning of this tissue, and whether they're going to bring it to term, or whether it's whether it's going to be expunged. That's up to the person carrying it. That's our religious viewpoint, and to try to push another one by state mandate upon us is just unconscionable. So we took that to the court, and through the first round of the court hearings, the dickhead judge waited over 9 months and then said, because she can't be pregnant anymore, this is a moot case, so I'm dismissing it.
Oh my
Okay, so I mean, that's the level of assholism we're dealing with here, and I feel like and there's really no recourse. I mean, there should be some process by which a judge gets pulled off the bench for something like that, and then all the way down the line, we had judges misruling on technicalities, and it never got to the point in all of this. Like you said, we took it to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court didn't take the case. We never got a judge to rule upon the actual merits of our legal claim. It was all quibbling over technicalities, and it was all, for the most part, radically off base quibbling over technicalities. Like, we can't say, like, if only our lawyer had done a little better. No, they were really stretching. And as to the reason they're doing this, it's because we're Satanists. And that's the really uncomfortable part here. Justice is supposed to be blind, but we know fucking well, if it were any other religious group putting up with this kind of open, blatant religious discrimination, the case would be treated a whole lot differently.
Okay.
What comes to mind is, like, if you're a Muslim and you want to pray during work hours, I think the 5 times a day towards Mecca, like, your employer is required to allocate you that time, right? Like, and that seems super straightforward. And if they were to say, no, wait till your lunch break, wait till after work, they get in trouble for that shit. Like, I don't get angry that often, but that judge waiting 9 months and saying, "Oh, you know what, moot point, dismissed." Like, man, that grinds my gears.
There's a lot of
it's even worse than that too, because the courts have found before that that if something is I forget the terminology they use. I believe it's capable of repetition yet evading review, and that's not something the courts are supposed to do. They're not supposed to take something in isolation and say, well, because in this instance she can't be pregnant anymore, it's a moot case. She's capable of repetition of this. They should review the case. And it's like, you would have you'd be amazed to know how astonishingly high our legal bills were just to get to that point, just to get a non sequitur ruling from a judge who decided he didn't want to hear the case. So this was the response we were going to get, and it's disturbing that that we're in a position now where we have judges willing to do that more, I think, than they were in previous times, and that's an outgrowth of the incompetent presidencies we've had in the past. George W. Bush was, I thought, as bad as we were going to get back at the time he was in office. We never thought we could dive as low as Donald Trump. And Donald Trump put a lot of really stupid fucking judges on benches now. And we're going to have to deal with that for a long time. And they don't even care about looking like they're following the law anymore. And that's the real dangerous part. Before there was some kind of decorum, there was some kind of compelling need in the minds of the judges, it seemed, to act like they understood the law and that they were going to abide by it. And I don't think we're going to have that kind of etiquette on the bench anymore.
I mean, even Bush had to pay lip service to the Constitution and to democracy.
Yeah.
And when Trump was able to wipe his ass with all that, of course, that it changed to the norms for the worse across the board.
You had something, Chase?
I was going to reply to the abortion thing a while ago. When I heard about like the abortion ritual, I kind of thought that it was just a troll thing. But when you actually described it as being largely this counseling and affirmation ritual, that sounds amazing because, like you mentioned, the thing of like women getting abortions often already have children. I mean, women getting abortions have like sometimes they are counseled that this is going to be a non-viable pregnancy, or they're carrying an already dead fetus, and like they've been forced to like carry it to term knowing that it's dead, with that being a wanted child.
Yeah.
And like just that there's all these it's and then they make it like, okay, so imagine that there's like this couple, this is their first kid they've got, and then they're told that like this child's going to be born with an encephaly, like microencephaly or something, and die within like 3 weeks, like. And then, so they're okay, like, do you carry this to term? And having to make that decision, then having to walk into an abortion clinic that's being like protested with people with signs calling you horrible things, and then like requiring that you have the waiting period. There's other ones that require that you get an ultrasound and look at it, which, like, imagine if you've been raped.
Oh, well, right. That was one victory we got in Missouri. Before in Missouri, it seemed apparent that getting an ultrasound was required, a fetal ultrasound, during that 72-hour period. But the state abdicated that immediately in oral arguments. And when our lawyer brought up the requirement of the ultrasound, the state of Missouri right away chimed in and said that it's not a requirement, that it's voluntary. And it was like, wow, well, okay, so you gave that up. And, the best we could do then is propagandize the fact that it wasn't required, and that, if anybody felt it was, they should be quite aware of this precedent that was set. But we knew it would cause controversy, the idea of an abortion ritual, right? But it's also important that we recognize that there's a real effort to make people who are getting an abortion feel guilty about it and to feel ashamed of it. And
they have this mandatory counseling in some places that's explicitly religious and just like guilting you. Like, again, right? You feel like a 13-year-old's been raped or something. Like, God.
Right, and we wanted to address that and be very open to our membership that this is your decision, and it's not that we're glorifying abortion or preferencing it over live birth, of course, but we're not going to think more or less of you for doing this, and you made this decision, and that's yours, and we accept that as a community, and you can talk openly about it, and nobody's going to give you any guilt or shame. And of course, we got pushback from people who are like, well, imagine what they think, the other side, and they see you've got an abortion ritual. And I get sick of that. I mean, fuck them and what they think. It's like the more hysterical they get, the more we're supposed to concede and back down and not mention certain topics or whatever. And fuck that. It's well past that point where we should stop worrying about the feelings of these people who are crying that anything we do in our lives is an affront to their values somehow.
Yeah. We have gone a little past the hour. I still wanted to pick your brain on some things. Are you okay staying longer with us, or should we wrap this up?
Yeah, no, go ahead.
Okay. So this is going to be a slight gear switch. Did any of you guys want to say any more on this before we switched?
Nah.
Okay. So I personally think it's a really good idea to protect one's rights and to use the tools available to protect them. And one of those tools is to be a protected class, like a religion, in the eyes of the government. And for a long time, I felt like our personal little movement here, the rationalist group, I mean, we have sort of a guiding ideology and ethos. We have our own community we're building, and that it's been my opinion, maybe it would be good to look into like incorporating as a religion. So I was wondering, like, do you think getting recognition, religious recognition, was an effective tool in defending your rights, and it is. Let's start with that.
Well, I do see a disparity in how we're treated as opposed to how other religions are treated. But I mean, on the bright side, it's a disparity that people don't want to admit to and they don't want to know exists. So you can assume that the more we push this and the more we expose it, the more headway we'll make in equaling out the playing field. But I think a real mistake in atheist and secular communities has been to denigrate religion, making it indistinguishable from supernaturalism. Because on a legal level, your values don't mean anything unless they're attached to a religion.
Right.
They're certainly not protected at all. And it's a weird kind of backwards notion that somebody's values are only meaningful or worthy of protection if they're not based upon any rational input whatsoever, but are based entirely upon received wisdom and divine fiats.
Or
And
resembling.
we reject that notion entirely. Obviously, it's the premise of what we do, and we've been very clear about how we don't endorse supernaturalism, and we value science as the arbiter of truth claims. But, Satanism also does have that kind of ceremonial aspect. And people push back on that too. They say, well, how can you have rituals and ceremonies without supernaturalism? And it's very easy. Think of going to a wedding. There's atheistic weddings, funerals, these types of things. They're moments anchored in time. They give you a memory to kind of mark an important occasion, or commemorate a new beginning or an end or whatever. It has some kind of emotional, psychological closure or catharsis. People like that, and there's a real sense of community behind it. And I feel like you have that component too, that really goes a long way into ticking the boxes that are required for having a religious organization. But if you have your own affirmative values as well, I would think rationalist values that try to look at some empirical evidence are far more meaningful than any superstitious values that anybody might hold. And I really feel like, if you look at this, if you're considering this for the rationalist movement, I would encourage you not to look at it as, trying to pull one over on the system, but considering maybe in which ways you really are a religion, and uh, why you should assume that you're not, and what are you yielding to superstitious organizations when you say that you're not and that they are? What makes them important and special, and what gives their values higher value than yours? I think you start contextualizing it that way, you'll see what an outrage it is that that you have so many people claiming that only religions of superstition should have these legal avenues available to them for protection.
Yeah, I really like that. I think that, I mean, I'm less allergic to the idea of religious incorporation than I once was. Like when you mentioned, the ritual of a wedding. For my wedding, my aunt was our officiant, and it was easiest in my state to officiate through some vague church, and it could be anything. But we went with the Church of the Dude, and like the idea that, I mean, it was doable without some sort of religious officiancy, but it was more hoops to jump through. And when you mentioned, like, it does really put a fine point on it when you can say, oh no, my value is religious based. Then the system has to say, oh, sorry, okay, you bet. Like if you were going to be drafted into Vietnam, you could be a moral philosopher with a PhD on nonviolence or aggression or something, and they would draft you anyway. But if your grandfather was a Quaker, you could just say that and you'd be off the list. That blows my mind. And yeah.
Right. I think it was in the UK where the Church of the Jedi was trying to get official recognition, and there was a ruling that said something like, They weren't going to be recognized as a church because, they were just entirely based on a work of fiction. Oh, the irony, But I was considering, but consider further, like, what would it take for the Church of the Jedi to be legitimate? By those kinds of standards, we could assume that if a sect broke off from the Church of the Jedi and decided that George Lucas, unbeknownst to George Lucas himself, was channeling a higher truth and essentially made a reenacted documentary of things that had actually happened a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away, that this kind of message was beamed into his mind by some superior intelligence or by the Force itself.
Hmm.
Then
That would
I
be
guess maybe they would be willing to consider that this was an actual religion, when in actuality you should just consider that those people are fucking insane.
Mhm. Yeah, that's always bothered me, that values reached through any sort of legitimate rational process are not protected. You have to be a. It's almost like, it feels to me like the governments felt held hostage by religions because people would get so irrationally angry about their religious beliefs that they would commit violence to protect them, and so that's why that got carved out. And I don't want to, threaten any sort of violence because I hate that shit, but on the other hand, I think if their rights get to be protected, there's no reason that our values and rights shouldn't be protected as well.
Well, in a really kind of disturbing dysfunction here is that sexual orientation, or transgenderism, the LGBTQIA plus community, none of that falls within a protected class. So you have on the one side this protected class intentionally and constantly beating up on a non-protected class and trying to diminish their rights. You should see an interview I did with Tucker Carlson. It was the second one I did on his show, where he had me on to argue about a press release we had put out where we were saying that in regards to the bakeries refusing to make gay wedding cakes or whatever, we put out a press release pointing out that bakeries can turn down gay couples, but religions are a protected class, so you can always order a really bombastic type of design for a satanic cake, and they'll have to make that for you. And of course, that idea got Tucker Carlson all hot and bothered, that we were going to try to compel businesses to do things that they didn't want to do. So he had me on, and I was arguing, okay, fine. I don't want to make businesses do something they don't want to do either. So, if you have the theocrat coming in to a gay business, they should be denied service if the proprietor wants to deny them service as well. Some gay business owner should be able to say no Christians allowed, whatever.
Certainly,
So I was saying that if you really wanted an equal playing field here, we would either make sexual orientation and identity a protected class, or let's take away the protected class status for religions. And Tucker Carlson, again, second time, I was 2 for 2 with him, really had no comeback argument for that, and just melted down and fell to pieces and cut the interview off.
Braver man than I to go argue with Tucker Carlson. And I mean, I can keep my cool, but I think that I have a limit that I would quickly make a fool of myself engaging with him for more than 60 seconds tops. There are links on the I was looking at the Wikipedia page for the Satanic Temple, and at the bottom there's a link to what is it, the Lucien Greaves archive or something.
Oh yeah.
So on the top of that was the Tucker Carlson interview, and there's a transcript as well. And I haven't read the whole thing, but I mean, it all I could say is major props to you.
It was really gratifying because he likes to do that condescending, arrogant laugh where, he once he feels like he's backed somebody into a corner, he just laughs like a moronic idiot and assumes the whole world is laughing along with him. In my interviews, I was the one laughing, and he was the one getting beat red and pounding his
Nice.
fist on the table. And it's like, yeah,
No one
good.
else will watch
Fuck
tonight.
you.
Yeah, me too.
So, are there anything that you think someone who is contemplating making the jump to filing for religious status, anything that they should absolutely know beforehand? Things to watch out for, whatever?
I would say, I mean, people look at us and they feel like we played a really clever game and that we've, kept on message, but I think they still feel that we've just manufactured it that way. You know what I mean? That we were meeting very kind of specific goals, and that in certain ways this all still is a prank, and we've kind of massaged that message to fit the legal needs. That's not the case, and I don't think you'll get very far if that is the case. You have to be exactly what you claim to be if you're going to do this and you're going to do it long term. If you want to be a religion and you want this to be a religion to the membership, that's what it's got to be, and you've got to be available to that, and you've got to be able to maintain those congregations, that kind of internal structure. You've got to be willing to see a community genuinely identify with that and not have a separate message, in the background for membership that's different from the one that you're putting out forward publicly, or it's all going to become undone very soon. And if we were as disingenuous as, a lot of people think we were, we would have never lasted outside, the first 6 months.
Okay. That is really good to know.
I'm about out of questions. This was enlightening and awesome. I don't know what else to say. I mean, I think I definitely had some misconceptions. Having done very little primary research or preliminary research before this conversation, I sort of got the vibe that this was a more sophisticated Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster, and this is so much more. It seems just awesome. And I don't know if this is an overdone joke, but you're doing the Lord's work. I mean, like the just going to the mat. I mean, you guys are fighting legal battles that need to be fought, and on the terrain that on the turf that has been set for you, and you have to play by those rules. It's like, all right, well then fine. I mean, I look forward to seeing the progress and eventual successes. I'm confident it'll work out with the protection of one's guiding one's body as one wants, and the abortion ritual. It'll probably be, it'll still be a fight, but I can't imagine that won't eventually work out. Well, I can't imagine. I hope it does. I hope it works out.
Yeah, we'll see. But it's been great being on, and check in with me anytime. I'm happy to chat.
Awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Can't really say anything better than Steven has, but I also kind of came into this thinking that this was just like sophisticated trolling, and it's so much more than that.
Yeah, this is great. Any upcoming projects that the Satanic Temple is working on, or anything? Yeah, open-ended.
I encourage everybody to check out Grey Faction. It's one of our lesser known campaigns, but we keep fighting back against people who propagate the satanic panic, and that's really grown in urgency now with the rise of QAnon and other conspiracist movements. But we're fighting back against people who propagate satanic panic within the mental health profession by using recovered memory therapies to come up with bizarre narratives of satanic ritual abuse, similar to recovered memory narratives of alien abduction and past lives. It's a whole other topic, but I really encourage people to check it out because I do think it's really important.
Having been barred from playing D&D as a child because of the satanic panic, because I'm old enough that I have some memory of the 80s, like, holy crap, I can't believe that's actually come back through the QAnon stuff.
Yeah.
It's nutty.
I've written quite a bit about it on my Patreon, and I'll let people know my Patreon is open and available to the public, so you can read that material for free. So, generally, it's good to just find me on Twitter at Lucien Greaves and see whatever I have pinned there. It's usually my latest Patreon post, and find us on social media to find out what's going on.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll definitely link to everything. I don't have good graceful ways to end conversations. Once again, thank you so much for coming on. This was great and enlightening, and I hope everyone learned something and does check out your guys' website and checks out the Patreon, the Twitter, and everything, and gets a good grasp on this. I feel like this is really important work, and keep fighting the good fight. This is great.
Yeah, you guys rock.
Yeah,
Great,
thank you
thank
so
you.
much for coming on and for everything you do.
Thank you.
All right, we are back. This episode, we are going to be doing the less strong sequences after rather than before, just because that's how things worked out with Lucien. But before we even get to that, I have a bit of feedback from, I think, 2 episodes ago. Okay, I will read it. This was concerning the less strong sequence post where we were talking about the writing your bottom line when the salesman is trying to convince you that a box has a diamond or not,
Okay.
and you don't know what his algorithm for presenting evidence to you is. Like, does he only tell you the stuff that's pro diamond is in the box, or does he only tell you points of evidence 4, 7, and 9, regardless of what they are? This was a piece of feedback that said actually you can still take his feedback into consideration to adjust your beliefs on how likely the box is to contain the diamond, and it's in theory straightforward. What he says, or what they say, I don't remember who exactly posted this. Damn it. I usually write down the name of the person who posted this. Anyways, so he says that, or they say, God damn it, I'm going to have to edit this. They say that if you know the salesman is trying to get you to believe there's a diamond in the box, then the evidence they give you is evidence of how strong the evidence that they have is. For example, if he tells you that it has a blue sticker on it, as evidence that there is a diamond in the box, that is evidence that he doesn't have any stronger evidence than that. So before you see what you know is going to be a filtered argument, you should consider how strong do I expect the argument they provide to be, and then update on the difference between what you expect and what you see, assuming that they want to give only really strong arguments that you agree with.
I like
Assuming.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to think of other extraordinary claims that require extraordinary evidence.
Well, I think one of the most common ones is belief about God.
That's what I was going to say. So if someone said, oh yeah, the universe is 10,000 years old and God made it, and you can tell because you can feel love. And it's like, oh, okay. So you have that's your evidence. Okay, great. So I can fairly dismiss your claim basically because that is not compelling whatsoever, right?
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I like that.
Yeah. I watched my parents get hard sold on a timeshare.
Did they fall for it?
Yes.
Aw.
That was actually the funny thing. I mean, good, sort of early lesson on making commitments and then sticking to them, or just be wary generally, I think was the main takeaway I got, because I was 8 or 9 or something. But my parents were like, oh, we're going to get this free vacation basically. And we just have to listen to these pitches from a timeshare. And they were like, but we're definitely not going to take it. We're just going to go do this free vacation. And I remember having to sit in the was it hour or 2 hour long session of sales pitch where the salesman was just this is going to, improve your quality of life. This is going to be so great. There's no downsides. And just watching my parents kind of go, oh, yeah, oh, okay. Looking at each other being And there was this idea that it was in Orlando, but you could trade the timeshare with other people that had the same timeshare. So if somebody had one in Bali or something, and they're like, hey, do you want to come to Orlando and we'll do Bali, that you could orchestrate that trade. But the person, they didn't ask for more details about that. And it turned out actually it was just really not worth the amount of effort you would have to put in, you as the person. It wasn't the timeshare company helped facilitate those trades or anything. It was you would have to go find this other person. And I don't know.
It just seems like if they had a compelling reason, they would have to fall back on these weird ones, right?
Yeah, but I think that's kind of what I was trying to get at. This is going to improve your quality of life. Well, why? And it's well, you could, trade this timeshare, or you could switch the time that you could come to the timeshare, or just things that sounded if you're just sitting there nodding, going, oh, that's cool. But if you think about, is this really going to be, I don't know, is this the strongest argument you have?
Yeah.
It was a lot of money. My parents didn't have a lot of money. And we never went to the timeshare either. Like that was the other funny thing, was just, they both ran their own businesses and they had kids and we had school, and we never actually like set aside the time to go take this free quote unquote vacation thing that we had, that we were just paying into.
Yeah.
So
Well, that's a bummer.
it's a bummer, but it was also sort of like, I remember being a kid being like, why did you say yes? I thought you said you were going to say no. And they're like, well, there's some cool things in there. And I was like, I think the main thing that I learned is just don't talk to persuasive salespeople, though.
Yes.
Yeah, they're master manipulators. I read the account of somebody who went to one of these, and when they said no because they were pre-committed, like they brought them into like a separate room and like tried to explain how dumb they were for turning this down, and like it was not as straightforward as, come to our 2-hour seminar, get free tickets to the show. Like they really dig it home.
Yeah. The other like thing that I learned, not really from that, but like I had a couple of other experiences of people trying to hard sell me things, or just like, I don't know, other like instances of people trying to like get something from you, like a beggar that keeps following you. And if you actually engage with them, it makes it a lot harder. But if you just say, no, thank you. No, I said no, regardless of what they say, they can't argue with that.
Right. And if they say, why not? You just keep going.
But what about yes?
Yeah.
That's like the best argument you could say against no.
When I did the same kind of thing where they tried to pitch me on a timeshare, I actually just didn't go. And they was like, here's your 2-hour block. I was like, great, I'll see you there. And then I was like, I'm at the beach.
Yeah.
Smart man.
All right, shall we get into the
Let's do it.
sequence posts?
Get into it.
All right. Our first one, excuse me. Our first one is a rational argument, where Eliezer considers the question, how can I construct an impeccable rational argument that Mortimer Q. Snodgrass is the best candidate for mayor of Hadleyburg?
Shout out for Mortimer Q. Snodgrass as
What
a
a
name.
good name.
And the answer is it can't be done. You defeated yourself the instant you specified your argument's conclusion in advance. He then points out that Snodgrass did really well on a questionnaire that unfortunately never got published, but you have access to, and you're thinking, but yeah, maybe I should publish this questionnaire because it polled really well with people. And you crossed the line. Eliezer says you crossed the line at the point where you considered whether the questionnaire was favorable or unfavorable to your candidate before deciding whether to publish it.
Wait, this is like an aside just to how much I love Eliezer's writing, but I love his construction of these like examples. This year, the Hadleyburg Trumpet sent out a 16-item questionnaire to all mayoral candidates with questions like, can you paint all the colors of the wind? And did you inhale? Alas, the Trumpet's offices are destroyed by a meteorite before publication. It's just...
What was
so
the one
enjoyable
that
to read.
he did badly on one of the questions? Do you remember which one?
I think it was question 11. Are you now or have you ever been a supervillain?
All right.
Couldn't answer that one with a straight face, I guess.
Yeah. Eliezer says, put yourself in the shoes of a voter still trying to select a candidate. Why would you censor useful information? You wouldn't if you were genuinely curious, if you were flowing forward from the evidence rather than flowing backwards from a fixed candidate.
Yeah. This is just a good illustration, I think, with examples of what it's like to reason from the bottom line.
Yeah.
And I think it's indispensable. And it's hard not to do this. This is also confirmation bias. This is everything, right?
Mm-hmm.
Knowing how to filter evidence that you're getting from other people, like we were talking about with the timeshare and stuff. Like the person selling you the timeshare isn't going to tell you all the reasons you shouldn't get a timeshare, right?
Yeah.
So you need to do that research on your own because you want to know, should I get a timeshare?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe it's a good deal, but you're not going to hear that you're not going to know whether or not it's a good deal from the salesperson.
I want to hear like, what are the downsides? Like they're like, oh, you can trade with anybody all over the world. And you're like, okay, is that easy? So in here he says, a logical argument's one that follows from its premises, thus the following argument's illogical. All rectangles are quadrilaterals. All squares are quadrilaterals. Therefore, all squares are rectangles. This syllogism is not rescued from illogic by the truth of its premises, or even the truth of its conclusion. So that's a really good,
Yeah, he said maybe
demonstration of this principle here.
maybe all squares are rectangles, but if so, it's not because they are both quadrilaterals. So always refuse to accept illogical deductions.
Yeah. He also there's just like, it was just a line from here where he says, also, sloppiness is habit forming, where I sort of just wanted to pull that one out, where it's like,
Just you don't accept bad arguments even for positions you like.
Well, I was also just thinking of I've had the most success with like I'm thinking again about like failing to be hard sold or to give somebody $20 or whatever on the street when I was just tired and forgot to like use the principles of okay, like I'm getting into this kind of situation now. I need to pre-commit to saying no, or I need to not get into the arguments. I need to not, it's hard. But it is also sort of important to remember, okay, sloppiness is habit forming. So the more you like let your guard down, or
And this was, both. This was pretty relevant considering the election we just had. That there were lots of reasons, people gave to vote for Biden, but ultimately, I think the main reason was he's not Trump, and really, you don't have to say anything else but that. He ends.
He's not Trump, and he's not worse than Trump.
Yeah.
It's hard to imagine a person who would have been worse than Trump, but that was sort of earlier on in the interview where he was saying it was hard to imagine someone could be worse than George Bush. It was just like,
yeah.
Don't even say that.
We were so naive. I mean, over the last 4 years, I've looked back fondly on the Bush era and be like, man, those were simpler times.
Remember when that was all we had to deal with?
I mean,
just incompetence.
And you mentioned like so one of the questionnaire items was, "Did you inhale?" Like that was the video from Clinton and Obama. Both had videos from their college days of, yes, I held the joint, but I didn't inhale or whatever.
Well, no, I mean, Clinton literally said that under oath.
Yeah.
Oh, then I guess
that's why the joke became, I didn't inhale.
I thought that, and then there's no way then Obama's,
Obama was riffing on it.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
I think Obama's like, I did inhale.
Oh, okay, nice. Yeah, there was a Key and Peele sketch about that too, and it was funny. But
yeah, apparently when Clinton was running for president, it was still a big deal whether or not you had done marijuana as a kid.
Yeah, I as dumb as that was, I yearn for those days when those were scandals and those were front page headlines for a week.
Yeah,
I'm confident. I know we're not talking about the election and stuff, but I'm confident about the Biden era. I think that he seems competent. He seems like he's a chill dude who will put together a successful cabinet. He's promoting like scientists to cabinet positions. People who are actually qualified to make decisions on climate change, for example, being the ones in charge of making the decisions, sounds pretty cool to me. And the push for unity and all that. Granted, it's going to be politicking and all this nonsense, but damn, that sounds relaxing. I haven't heard shit coming out of the White House in the last week. It's been great.
Yeah.
He's been president for 4 days, and I haven't heard anything.
I am all confident he's going to be so much better than Trump.
Yep,
I'll give you that. Yeah,
my hopes are for just a boring few years.
That would be nice.
Of like stuff happening.
I no longer want to live in interesting times.
Yes.
When you're talking about, remember when that made headlines? Or like, I keep seeing this headline this last week, and it's this clickbait headline, and it just says like, "These cocaine hippos have got to go." And I've resisted clicking. I was like, I can't click on that. I'm like, just don't do it. No, I don't even know why. Like,
have you clicked on it?
No, I have not.
All right.
It's all I could see is from the subheadline that it's something to do with Colombia and cocaine, and I guess like they've got hippos.
Smuggling their cocaine and hippos.
The thing is that like the world makes no sense anymore, and like it's gonna be hard to come up with like clickbait headlines that surprise you.
If I was a Colombian drug lord, having coked out hippos as part of my defensive line would be, I think, a not the worst strategy. Yeah. They're ferocious.
They are.
Yeah.
Oh my god. I think they sweat blood. No, that's not true. They have pink sweat. But
that's weird that they have pink sweat.
Something to do with some enzyme.
Hey, there's a thing near the end of the post, which I find interesting. He says, "Whatever actually decides your bottom line is the only thing you can honestly write on the lines above it." Which, absolutely true. Definitely something we should keep in mind as rationalists. But does this mean you cannot be an honest salesman? Because as a salesman, what actually is your bottom line is, if you buy this product, I will get some money.
I think that the way to shove that square peg into that circle, into that, I don't know, circular hole, is if you actually believe in the product you're selling.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so like, granted, you can't tell. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, your mom was my realtor when I bought my house, and she was straight up. We bought a place. We did not buy the most expensive place because she didn't push for that one, and she didn't really push for any because she's dope. And anyone who wants to buy a place in the greater Denver area should contact Inyash. But like, she would come in and say, yeah, no, this is no good. This would need work. You guys don't want to, if you're going to make an offer, tell them to take off money for this.
Mhm.
So, I mean, maybe she's not a perfect case for like the salesman, but
no, a
if she
job
talked
is
to,
to find like that they're your representative, right?
In theory, yeah.
yeah, but
in practice, not always.
at the end of the day, she doesn't get paid unless we buy something.
Right.
So like it was in her personal self-interest to get us to buy a home, and her
And
very
the more
selfish personal
expensive
interest.
one.
Exactly. To get the most expensive one.
Yeah, but like long term, you could also argue long term best interest is like to get a reputation as a realtor who is a genuine advocate for you, the buyer.
Exactly. I recommended her to my friends who are buying homes in the area because she was great.
Yeah.
And like if she shoehorned us into buying some shithole, I would tell them to avoid her like the plague.
Yeah.
I think that like if you believed in what you're selling, I think that I think you can get around that. Like, yes, your goal is to sell it, but if you believe you're helping them, it's like, yeah, man, I actually have a solution to this problem you're presenting, and this is it.
Every now and then we do recommend things on the podcast, and we don't get paid for it, but even if we did get paid for it, I don't know. The only time I've ever recommended something on this podcast anyway is something that I really thought was awesome and that other people would get value out of.
What was that?
I mean, the most recent thing I can remember is when we talked about the video game / what's the girl with the voice? I
Ashley
guess that's
Birch?
literally all of them. But no, Billie Eilish.
Oh yeah.
Go with the voice.
Oh yeah. we were
You mean the singer.
Yes,
we were
the human that can make noises with their throat.
we were trying to think of like just positive things we've been doing lately.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, you weren't selling your own book, right?
Right.
Like, and when you do, you have solicited your stuff before. Because
Speaking of which, I have written a book everyone can buy.
yeah, called What Lies Dreaming, available at whatliesdreaming.com.
Yes, or
Uh,
on Amazon.
And the thing is like you're pitching it because you actually think people have fun reading it.
Right.
Yes, you make a buck. I'm gonna hawk right now. This is the first time we've hung out together since the beginning of December, maybe earlier. You guys haven't seen the phone case, and I got to show it off today.
Yeah.
We have a merch line with phone cases. Even if you don't get ours, go to what is it, redbubble.com or something? I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay.
And
You can get lots of stuff
pick a
printed.
pattern you like. The snap case, like the thin one, is like just, I don't know, a millimeter thick, and it is big enough to cover the screen. I'm selling this thing whether it goes in our pocket or not. This case is tight.
Cool.
If you like the picture, go for it. If you don't, there's everything on there. There's Marvel stuff. There's like trippy dippy space
There's
stuff,
Marvel stuff at Redbubble?
like fan art.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's okay.
They're probably pushing the line, but
yeah.
Yeah.
That's Marvel if they wanted to. Well, Disney, I guess, if they wanted to, I guess could crack down on them. But
when they
that would
yeah.
get them some bad press.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they don't mind the bad press. I remember there was the thing, and then we're far afield, but they gave some dad who was burying his dead son. They wouldn't let him use a Spider-Man headstone,
Really?
and like,
Ugh.
oh no.
and so yes, bad press. They're clearly not afraid of it. I think it was not just about like unlicensed use of our stuff. It's just like we don't want gravestones of our things, and I get where they're coming from. I disagree with it.
There's also a legal precedent. If you don't defend your copyright, you lose your copyright. That's U.S. law. So anything that got enough newsworthiness that like a lot of people knew about it, they probably have to say something about.
That's wild.
Like the fan art probably goes under the radar because there isn't anything in the news like, oh, you can get this phone case that someone made up, drew their own picture of Thor on. But if it went into the news, then they probably, you have to pursue that, or the U.S. government says, well, obviously you don't care about your copyright. Now you don't have copyright on Spider-Man anymore. It's a fucked up system.
That sounds insane.
Yeah.
Yeah. Love it. All right. So I can't think of a segue into we change our minds less often than we think.
Mm-hmm.
I think,
Just a fact.
yeah, I mean, this,
You
yeah.
don't, you don't need a segue. It's just
Okay,
Next,
post done.
By the way,
Next
I
post,
prepared-
yeah.
yeah. So
there's not much. I mean, I think, go ahead. Hum.
Okay, he started with a quote from a study where a number of people over a few years discreetly approached colleagues faced with the choice of different job offers and asked them to estimate the probability that they will choose one job over the other. The average confidence in the predicted choice was 66%, but only 1 out of the 24 respondents chose the option which he initially assigned a lower probability to, yielding an overall accuracy rate of 96%. Meaning that people were wildly underconfident in how likely they were to choose their more attractive option, and that people, even when they only thought it was 60% likely, were much less likely to change their minds than they actually thought.
What's cool about that is, and I guess I should keep this in mind because I've recently assigned a probability to whether or not I'll change jobs. And I need more data before I can put a pin in it for sure. But if I say 85, it means 100 basically,
Yeah.
right? And that's a nice shortcut. Once I'm pretty sure I'm leaning this way, I can just stop thinking about it. Now, granted, you shouldn't. If it's important, you should like realize that you're making that error and like actually try and reassess, make sure you're weighing the cost and benefits and stuff.
Yeah.
But I guess I wouldn't, you shouldn't kick yourself for saying, well, I was only 60% sure. It's like, yeah, but you were leaning that way.
Yeah.
So
there's a couple brands of appliances which I've heard you just should avoid. And last time I went out shopping for an appliance, like I looked at them briefly, but then I thought, why am I even looking at them? I've heard I should avoid them. I'm not even going to bother. So that's how I went forward, even though they were the cheaper ones.
Smart.
Yeah. Eliezer says, once I could guess what my answer would be, once I could assign a higher probability deciding one way than the other, then I had, in all probability, already decided. And realizing that can really save a lot of time and stress in your life. I saw Robin Hanson once post something similar where he said, whenever you are really, really torn between two decisions, it's often the case that they aren't very different. That's the reason you're torn. Like if one was obviously superior than the other, you wouldn't be torn. You'd be like, I'm obviously going for the much better option. But if they're really close, then which one you go with doesn't make that much a difference because there isn't that much difference between them anyway. So don't stress about it so much.
Yeah, that's a cool heuristic.
Yeah.
I think it's cool to see this formalized. I had just like this very weird epistemology as a kid. I used to like write what I thought were these deep like truth things in my journals. I go back and laugh at them occasionally. But I do remember kind of starting from like really, I don't know, like black and white thinking as a kid where I was like kind of watching the behavior of people around me and trying to decide what I thought was good or ethical or whatever. And for a while I had this sense that you should be stubborn and stick to your, like I noticed though that people respect people who stick to like their guns or like make a choice and then defend it. And then I remember I think I was it's probably middle school. We were doing like some fake debate thing, and I had been thinking before about like, well, but like it actually seems like regardless of whether people respect you more, you might make a better decision if you're willing to change your mind about things. And it's obvious, like if the other side makes a better argument, it makes you look stupid if you just stand there going, well, yeah, but this one is the one that I picked. So I remember just like, playing with this in this debate by like arguing my hardest for the one side, and then halfway through getting up and then walking over to the other side and being like, you know what, I've changed my mind and I'm going to join this side. And I like that no one else did that. And it was just like, I don't know, the teachers were always like, they found me really weird because a lot of this like was stuff I'd been chewing on and writing in my journals and in my own head. And the actual behavioral outcome would be something that was like, why? I wouldn't talk to anybody about it. I was just like, haha, I did that. They're just like, okay, you're weird.
Writing stuff down really helps you process it. Like,
oh God, yeah.
I've come through many, I don't know, insights, decisions, whatever, by writing a blog post or just chatting with people on Discord. Just like getting it out in physical format helps. Sometimes I just write something up and I find that things have changed while I was writing it in my mind, and so I delete it. Just having
Wait,
your
writing
thoughts.
it in your mind?
No, writing it like a blog post.
Oh, you're saying the thing in your mind changed. Okay.
Yeah, the thing in my mind changed, and then I delete the post.
In your mind?
No, like that's the thing. It doesn't work if you don't have it on a paper or on a screen or something. You actually need to get it out there in words, which is interesting.
Yeah, and then
at least for me,
seen interesting studies about. I think it's more about like committing things to memory, but I wonder if processing might work that way as well. But like manually writing things like on paper with a pen or pencil. At least you
retain it better.
It makes you retain it better. I think there's something about. I gotta look into that again. But I have noticed just. I used to journal obsessively. I do it less obsessively now, but I still get a lot of value out of it in like an introspective sense. I largely for a while just went away from paper because it's inconvenient. If you have a laptop or a phone, you just have infinite paper sort of. And then there's you can backspace things and you can, but yeah, there's, they have a different feeling in a way that's hard to describe. And it is kind of interesting where I think I remember when I was journaling by hand in a notebook, there was something about I was much less, just because it's difficult or, like a mild inconvenience to cross things out or erase things, I didn't edit. I would write a thought and then I would see my thought sort of like you were saying, change as I was writing it rather than, but like if I was journaling and just like text edit, I could write a thought, be like, nah, and then delete it. But so like if I go back and reread my journals about, I don't know, like that were in text edit, they sound more coherent, but like you're recording less of your own thought process, which is, I don't know, just random thoughts.
I think one of the things that interesting things that Eliezer comes to with this post is he says, you might think that you can arrive at a belief or a decision by non-rational means and then try to justify it. And if you found you couldn't justify it, you reject it. But we change our minds less often, much less often than we think. So kind of a what is it when you tell someone to be a warning? There we go. A warning, maybe not to do that kind of thing.
Maybe not to make up your mind too fast.
Well, not just make up your mind, but even arrive at a decision before you've really looked into things. Like again, deciding to vote for Biden, I still think was probably the best thing for society because we got rid of Trump, which is great. But then trying to justify it and saying like, oh no, I have these other good rational reasons for it, I think was necessarily
necessary.
Yeah, not just necessary, but I think that it would be somewhat dishonest. If you're like, well, I'm actually voting for Biden because of all these other good reasons, and you don't need those, and those probably aren't entirely true. They wouldn't end up changing your mind anyway.
Yeah,
you should have considered all that before you decided to vote for him, if that was going to be the case.
And I think that it's one of those things too. You want people to be able to say, "I've changed my mind." I feel like this. Like you can't say, "Well, no, you're just reasoning backwards now." In every case, obviously, that's why this is an art that needs refinement and practice. Like otherwise, you're just throwing techniques around and doing it wrong. But like you don't have to have been campaigning for Biden since 2018 to say, I think I would have voted for him anyway, right? Like so you can update, and yet like if your honest reason is the simple lame sounding one, which is I like him more than the current president, like hey, own it. That's fine.
Yeah.
You don't have to like. I don't feel like in this case you don't have to defend yourself with better reasons. It's like no, I have my reason. That's it. Like, is that the best reason that I would use in every case? Not necessarily, no. But it's that simple here. Sure. Yeah.
I think that's a similar reasoning for people who voted for Trump. That maybe they have they have justifications for why they did it, but ultimately they decided before all those other justifications.
Yeah, and then they, there's...
And then, they come up with things like, oh, but it's, keeping the parties balanced or, trying to undermine the strength of the federal regulations or whatever.
Right. He's just joking or something.
Yeah.
And, this isn't the anti-Trump podcast, although we are all feeling that way. But I was just thinking I couldn't get this out of my head so I saw that Key and Peele sketch with Obama inhaling marijuana. And like, that was the big thing, 8 years ago. And it's like, no one gave a shit. Oh God, yeah, 12.
16?
Fuck, we're old. In any case, Obama.
Yeah,
but like there's that video of Rudy Giuliani dressing in drag and Trump motorboating his tits.
What?
And it's like this. Yeah.
Did this happen IRL or was
this was a real thing. That they were doing some stupid thing in the 90s or whatever.
Okay.
But like this wasn't Obama, this wasn't the did Obama inhale moment, right? Nobody cared because there was no such thing as I needed to draw attention to that hypocrisy. All right, I got to push past it, otherwise I can't be dissuaded from talking about it more.
Yeah.
So I like the end of this post. I'm sure you can think of at least one occasion in your life when you've changed your mind. We all can. How about occasions in your life when you didn't change your mind? Like, that's obviously harder because we don't keep a list of things that I still believe today that I believed yesterday. But I like the, in brackets that you put, can each of us think of an occasion when we could have changed our minds but didn't?
Yes.
And if I
were you gonna?
I was going to say I wish I had time to think about it, so please, go ahead.
The first thing that jumped into my mind was the first time I did mushrooms. I remember, I think this was because I had read Goran's post about doing LSD. Like he did I think a self-analysis or like N of 1 study that said of whether or not like LSD microdosing had any positive cognitive effects like people claimed, but he got it back when what was it? What was that dark web?
Silk Road.
Yeah, he got it off Silk Road back when he's like, so I got like 2 LSD units from Silk Road. one to do my experiments on, and one to use for a, in scare quotes, trip, which that was just adorable. And then like beforehand, he wrote a bunch of predictions and put percentages on them. And one of them was like that he would become religious or like believe in supernatural things afterward. And then so I sort of, and he did not actually. It sounded like the trip was pretty uneventful, or at least from his perspective. And I had never done any kind of psychedelic. I had like smoked marijuana like once or twice. Later, I found that can also be psychedelic. I had like had alcohol, and so I was pretty on the. I was like, okay, like there are a bunch of people who claim to have had these like spiritual, like that was the thing that worried me, is like that I would lose my beliefs in science and rationality after taking this thing, because like there's quite a few people who do take psychedelics and then change religions, or like say like they'd been an atheist before and they find religion or believe in aliens or something. So but then I remember actually while being on mushrooms I was like, oh my god, magic's real, that, not really that, but I sort of do remember having a few moments of, oh man, maybe magic is real, like, because my perception of reality was so distorted that I saw things that seemed to defy physics. And then once I like was sober again, I thought back over those experiences and then was like, nope, that was drugs.
That's weird.
And it was this relief where it was like, okay, you go back to normal afterwards.
Yeah.
Unless like you probably didn't have very like solid foundations for your beliefs to begin with.
Maybe it's because I'm on SSRIs or something, but I've never, even while really high on acid, I've never had anything like that. Like I've on more than one occasion like communed with God while on acid, but even
sounds like something like that.
Well, but even at the time, I knew it wasn't really God.
Okay.
Like I was like, I'm high. This is great. Hey, God. Like I knew it was the drugs.
Okay,
That's because your mind is mighty. Mine, I get
Again,
thrown.
might be the SSRIs.
Yeah, little column A, little column B.
Okay.
I get thrown through the ringer. I haven't had any of those transcendent experiences where like I'm like they're internally substantial and like significant, but like I've never talked with something that wasn't in the room.
I didn't do talking.
Well, even in my head.
Yeah,
Like
it was like a more of an understanding
right on.
than any sort of verbal.
I had those like with different parts of myself, I think, but it's I don't know. That's describing drugs sounds insane. People haven't tried it,
Yeah,
so
I know, and it's probably really boring.
probably. I can't think.
It was really interesting.
I wanted.
Like, before I tried any drugs, when people talked about it, I was like, there's no fucking way that anyone can experience anything like that. And yet, you can.
I'm trying to think of a good example of when I failed to update sooner, and I'm sure that there's. I mean, I know I was just thinking about this like earlier this week or last week, and I'm failing to pull stuff to mind. That's not because I've always been right; it's because I'm doing a poor job retrieving it. But
maybe it was just because I'd already gone through the whole really truly believing in the supernatural and God when I was a kid, and then rejected it.
Yeah, maybe if you haven't had that,
Yeah.
no, I mean like a small
True
example.
belief.
Like I should have believed this sooner.
Oh,
yeah.
Well, I was going to say, for my example of an occasion when I could have changed my mind but didn't, like 2 or 3 days ago, I ordered a new phone, and I kind of figured I was going to buy the cheapest one available for various reasons, which I've mentioned already. But I went online, I looked at the phones that were available, and I clicked on one of the more expensive ones, or just a step up, right? And I thought real quickly about it, and then I was like, no, I'm going to go with the cheapest one. So that's a recent occasion where I could have changed my mind, but I didn't.
Yeah, I guess I'm trying to think of the only way that I'll know that this actually matters is if I could have changed my mind and didn't, and then subsequently changed it later. Like, because I mean, I could have changed my mind. I got was it not last night or the night before I got Qdoba? Like, I could have gotten something else. Like, that's not interesting, right?
Well,
like,
I mean, I think that's part of what he's saying, that most of the times when you change your mind, or you don't change your mind, it's not interesting. It's just something you were going to do, and you go ahead and do it.
I'm trying to think of an interesting example where, like, I should have been faster to pick this up and then got to it later in life. And I'm sure that there are examples, but I can't think of one.
I have an example for myself. But it's gonna sound bad for rationalists, but when it took me a long time after getting into rationality to update in the direction, or to change my beliefs that a brain could be emulated. And that was from having just like read P.Z. Meyer's blog for so long, and being like really coming into just like my first and like main love in the scientific fields is biology. and it was I'd seen so many arguments against Ray Kurzweil's claims that were like that were the typical like sort of transhuman futurist like over excitement that was like in the next 50 years we'll have a perfectly emulated brain, and it was a biologist saying like that there was actually the title of the post, and we could probably find it, was Ray Kurzweil doesn't understand the brain. I still remember that.
Cool.
And I remember reading all these things and being like, these make perfect sense. And then when I went to my first rationalist meeting and people were talking about, I think it was Robin Hanson talking about brain emulation, I was just like, oh, that's bullshit. And they were all like, why would that be bullshit? And I felt completely embarrassed because I was like, this was an argument that it was from like 5 years ago, and I had just never re-examined it and updated on it. And it was based on not even the claim of, can you ever emulate a brain? Is it possible? Is it going to be possible like for humans to do? Maybe.
Yeah.
But like, no, it is possible. And like, actually I've like updated much more towards it being a thing to, I mean, I really hope it happens in my lifetime. But like assuming we don't like devolve into the Middle Ages because of various political things or destroy ourselves with nukes or whatever, it's gonna happen, I think.
I really like PZ's blog too. One of the posts that like has most stuck with me, which I think most people don't even remember, is the one where he said why it's okay to eat chickens, justifying it from a biological standpoint. I was like, cool, I'm going to eat some chickens. And then I did. And nowadays that is like the almost taboo food for the EA side of the rationalists, since that's the highest suffering to pound of meat ratio animal. But
I've heard both ways, and I know we're this is probably the least interesting part of the episode for people when we're not even talking about the posts. But so for me, I feel like chickens are the better choice to eat because they can suffer less than cows. Granted, you eat more chickens per year than you could cows per year, but cows are also worse for the environment.
Yeah.
So I don't know which side of the fence to come down on if you're going to pick between one or the other.
I mean, I still fall back on which animal is the most conscious, most intelligent, and chickens are really low on that scale. So that's why I'm okay with chickens, and I try to.
That's where I think that actually they're not as low on that scale as you probably think.
But they're lower than cows.
But are they literally like 2,000 times lower, or however many cows per chicken it takes to how many chickens are there per cow?
Right.
It's not 2,000, but it's got to be on the order of hundreds, right?
Well, I mean, the PZ article that I'm referencing was specifically one that said that argued that chickens are basically little meat production robots that have very little going on.
I mean,
and
if you
he's
zoom
not
out
a
and
chicken
squint,
biologist,
but
so
if you zoom out and squint, so are people.
Right? Yeah,
we're just vehicles for genes. You can do whatever you want to them.
We're much better at defending ourselves from humans that want to eat us than chickens are.
All right, so this is insert segue. Avoiding your beliefs' real weak points.
Yes,
this might actually, if I were feeling more creative, I could have thought of something about this might be a weak point against someone who's just against eating animals entirely or something.
Well, I realize that eating meat is one of my weak points, but I also am not in a position to not eat meat at all right now. So
that's sort of where I'm at. Like I eat a lot less meat than I used to, and I buy, as far as I can tell, ethically sourced eggs. Like other than growing them or whatever, harvesting them myself. I feel like I'm buying ethically sourced eggs, and so like I feel like as this is, and I know that I'm not even touching the post yet, but I don't like the you're either doing it right or you're doing it wrong. I feel like you can be doing it better, and or you can be doing it less wrong. And like if you're doing better, then it's like that's still good. I think Scott Alexander made that great post about like if you do vegan 1 day a week, you're still doing better than basically everybody.
Yeah.
And so like if you're donating 0.5% of your income a year, you're still doing better than basically everybody. Like, sure, could you
0.5% enough to do better than basically everybody?
Probably, because almost everybody does nothing.
Who just aren't doing it.
A lot of people do some little bits, either around Christmas time or giving to their church, which I think should count as an contribution.
I don't count tithing. Yeah.
Okay.
So I mean, whatever it is, like it, if you
that cancels out a contribution,
right? But I do feel like, and so with the number aside, like you don't have to be living, Will McCaskill style to be living an ethical life. You can be you can still live very comfortably in a nice house and say, yeah, I still give 10% of my income to charity and I am able to buy a new car or something.
As long as you do better than average, the average will slowly creep up and the human race will keep getting better.
Yeah. And that's not to say like, give yourself a pass if you want to do better, but like, I guess don't beat yourself up for not doing perfect.
Right.
All right. Sorry. So avoiding your beliefs, real weak points. This is fun.
Yes.
He uses it in the context of a religious example at first, but you can use this everywhere. Like he talked about when his great grandmother died or something, and his grand uncle attributed he attributed it to the will of God, and that like he says even as a kid it seemed like I noticed that it violated the rules of religious self-deception as I understood them, and if I'd noticed my confusion I could have made a successful surprising prediction. Not long afterward my granduncle left the Jewish religion. I guess we can read more of the post before we talk about like other examples of it, but you go ahead and summarize. I'm bad at it.
Okay. In summary, it's that the modern Orthodox Judaism encourages people to be doubtful and inspect the scriptures and, see where it conflicts with science, but only in places where they're going to win. I think the example he gives is that it wouldn't be surprising to hear a rabbi in his weekly sermon point out the conflict between the 7 days of creation and the 13.7 billion years since the Big Bang. But he has a clever explanation for it, involving 3 other biblical references, a midrash, and a half-understood article in Scientific American. In Orthodox Judaism, you're allowed to notice inconsistencies and contradictions, but only for the purposes of explaining them away. And whoever comes up with the most complicated explanation gets a prize. It doesn't have an emphasis on the virtues of blind faith. You are allowed to doubt. You're just not allowed to successfully doubt.
I've heard people push back on that successfully doubting is supposed to be something that you're doing, but that's also
the Jesuits, the same thing where you're supposed to successfully doubt, but it's always to ultimately, show how God is smarter than humans.
Well, and just from like the mimetic survivability of that idea, it's like if one of the virtues of it was to disenchant or disenfranchise yourself of it, the memes wouldn't survive, right?
Yeah, it's like its ultimate purpose is to show that my religion is stronger than doubt.
Yeah. I mean, the Jehovah's Witnesses had kind of a thing, just not nearly to this extent. It was like maybe baby modern Orthodox Judaism, and in 1,000 years maybe they'll get to there. But they would teach critical thought and debate in church every Thursday. 1 hour was devoted to that, for the purposes of destroying other people's religions and their religious beliefs to convert them to Jehovah's Witnessism. And like the vast
sounds like such a bad idea for their own survivability.
The crazy thing is, like, the vast majority of witnesses like stayed in the religion anyway. But I started using those tools on my own religion. I was like, hold up a minute. Why doesn't this argument work against us as well? And that was part of the reason I left. They taught me how to critically think about religions. And so, I'm assuming that people who really internalize this, will, I would hope that people that really internalize their lessons would leave the religion, but I guess either they don't internalize it or they're really good at doing the same thing here.
There's a lot of secular Jews.
Yes, there are.
And the ones that are religious tend to be like smarter about it, and for want of better words there, but
I don't know, man, like the crazy Orthodox ones.
Well, I'm saying okay, yeah.
I think that Judaism is a hard example there because there's a huge cultural component to it that is non.
Yeah, that's
I mean,
true.
so we had a discussion
There's a very widespread of Judaism belief.
Yeah, I mean, we just talked with Lucien about does a religion mean anything spiritual or supernatural? Not necessarily, right?
Yeah.
So I think that when you say the Jewish religion, I think that there's definitely some equivocating there, and there's plenty of room for Mott and Baileying.
There's the John Stewart Jew who literally does not believe in the supernatural, and then there's the Orthodox deep God, I don't know where in New York exactly they are. Deep entrenched ones where the women aren't allowed to speak to the men when they're in synagogue because that would be against God's law, and just really some of the crazy stuff that the fanatics believe is nuts. You're like, wow, okay, that's like any other crazy hardcore religious person.
So the trick here then is to attack your beliefs at their actual weak points.
Yeah.
And this is a painful exercise, right?
Yeah.
It super is.
And it becomes easier. Well, it's easier to practice on targets that you're not super attached to. You know, like I bet we could reason you unstressfully into like why it might be worthwhile to buy a good phone rather than the next generation's shitty one.
Right.
But like that's not something that you are really attached to, right?
Yeah.
So like those maybe practice on soft targets, but like it shouldn't feel like a fun practice. You know, like, oh great, I had this, you know, engaging internal or external dialogue with somebody about this, engaging with my my doubt here. It's actually scary.
Yeah.
There's a real chance that you could lose something important. You could feel like you're losing something important to you.
Mm-hmm.
He says, people don't think about the real weak points for their beliefs for the same reason they don't touch a oven's red hot burners. It's painful.
Mm-hmm.
To do better, when you're doubting one of your most cherished beliefs, close your eyes, empty your mind, grit your teeth, and deliberately think about whatever hurts the most. And I remember doing this not early. I was like, I don't know, like halfway through the amount of time I'd been into rationality and turned out against feminism and like stopped self-identifying as a feminist. And that sucked.
Yeah.
It still sucks.
Yeah.
But like,
that was a big point of pride for me back in the day.
which,
Being a feminist.
oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it was, yeah, I mean,
it's one of those things like that's why I dislike a lot of labels in the first place. Like I vote blue on everything, but I'm a registered independent, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, because if the blue starts saying something stupid, I don't have to fight my tribe on it. So like I avoid a lot of that by avoiding labels. Like I remember, I want to avoid more digressions on it,
that's
but
the like keep your identities small.
yeah.
He says,
tenant.
continuing on what you were saying about the thinking what hurts the most, he says, don't rehearse standard objections whose standard counters make you feel better. Ask yourself what smart people who disagree would say to your first reply and your second reply. Whenever you catch yourself flinching away from an objection you fleetingly thought of, drag it out into the forefront of your mind. And I want to point out that the rationalist community is where the term steel manning first became a thing. And I think it was right around the time of this post where he said things like, ask yourself what smart people who disagree with you would say to your reply. And I think that's a wonderful thing that the rationalist community has brought to the world. And I also love the fact that nowadays, like it's been 13 years since this, it's a common term that I hear all over the place by people who, you know, some of them aren't even aware of what the rationalist movement is.
Yeah. And
like I hear it dropped in just random political podcasts now.
Yeah, it's definitely common vernacular, which I like. And, you know, it's like, I don't think that the rationalist community invented steel manning.
No.
But what they did was attach a handy label to something that was easily identifiable.
Yeah.
You know, like there's a long practice in like philosophy or even science, you know.
Principle of charity, I think they called it.
Yeah. And where you engage what you think your enemy, your opponent would say. Like in The Origin of Species, you know, Darwin argued with people that weren't in the room about, you might think this. Well, here's my response to my anticipation of your objection.
Yeah.
Like that's just called good thinking.
Yeah.
But when you put a good handle on the specific thing that they're doing there, and you can summarize it in a sentence, which is like, build up a strong version of the opponent's argument and then see if you can stand up to that.
Yeah. Steel man, opposite of straw man.
Exactly. But so that's what I'm saying. There's tons of value in being able to shorthand it. And now it's, like you said, common vernacular.
I was just thinking, Mott and Bailey seems kind of be similar thing. Like Mott and Bailey is almost like a modified version of moving the goalposts, which has been, you know, a thing that's been around for decades at least. I don't know, maybe the term is centuries old in other languages. But it seems to capture more nuance than just moving the goalposts. And I heard it just a couple weeks ago on the Skeptic's Guide to the Universe, who I know they're familiar with the rationalist movement, but I'm not sure that they...
I think atheists have been using Mott and Bailey since, you know, like a lot of atheism ended up being about like debating creationists and finding logical fallacies.
Yeah, but the term for it was always like moving goalposts or something, or some other fallacy.
I think I remember the use of Mott and Bailey.
I
don't know. I could be wrong.
In either case, the most recent time
by Scott Alexander.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, in a Slate Star Codex post a few years ago.
Okay.
At the very least, the most recent time I read this was this morning in the wise words of Eneasz. Context aside, it said, that's the biggest Mott and Bailey ratio I've seen since God is love.
Right.
And I appreciated the succinctness of delivering that point.
Mott to Bailey ratio.
Right, sorry, yeah.
Yep.
Let's see. This one ends, and I think that this also has its own page somewhere on Less Wrong for sure, but the Litany of Gendlin.
Can we all say it at once?
Gendlin. Can we all say it at once? Would that be weird?
Let's try. 3,
ready?
2, 1. What is true is already
This
so.
feels
so weird.
Nope, can't do it. It seems too cultish.
Yep, I'm out.
Yeah.
All right,
I kind of loved it, but whatever.
I'm glad you're having fun, but I couldn't. All right. What is true is already so. Owning up to it doesn't make it worse. Not being open about it doesn't make it go away. Because it's true, and it is what's there to be interacted with. Anything untrue isn't there to be lived. People can stand what is true, for they are already enduring it.
Yes. First said by Gendlin. I didn't write down his first name here, but it's become one of those litanies in the community, similar to like the litany against fear from Dune.
I was actually just gonna bring up the litany against fear.
I got to hear it. I didn't read Dune.
Oh, I must not fear. Fear is the mind killer. Fear is the little death that brings total obliteration. I will face my fear. I will let it pass over me and through me. And when the fear is gone past, I will turn the inner eye to see its path. Where the fear is gone, there will be nothing. Only I will remain.
Nice.
Damn, awesome.
See, that's why I wanted to do that together. I feel like this is... Okay, so... I don't know. I actually recite the litany against fear.
Okay.
Kind of the way, like, Catholics would recite Hail Marys. And then there's even, like, a thing of, like, praying the rosary, where, like, it's this mantra.
Yeah.
I like just sort of the idea of having rationalist mantras like this, where...
I do too. And we have several of them, but the chanting them in unison thing was too far.
Yeah, I
For me.
didn't enjoy it, but I do see the value. I mean, I think of the litany of Tarski frequently. You know, it basically comes to mind without intention, which is the whole point. The point of doing of articulating and practicing rationality is that the techniques become flinch reactions, right?
Yeah.
You want it to be like, you know, we all have our shitty heuristics that are easy to trick people into believing or saying stupid things. The idea is to build in grooves that catch those before you get there.
Yeah, like
And-
martial arts.
Exactly.
Making something muscle memory.
Yeah, Krav Maga style. You know, if I find myself scared of a thought, I'm like, nope, hold on. If it's true, I want to believe it. And if it's, you know, so like that's, I don't usually have to go through the rest of it, but like because I already know, like, hold on, you just flinched away from that. Let's pull that back in and say, look, is this true? If so, this is what you want to believe.
Is Litany of Tarski the one that I want to believe snow is white if and only if snow is white?
Yeah.
Okay.
Or insert whatever. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I want to believe that magic is going away from whatever. Yeah. Methods of rationality.
Yeah. That magic is seeping out of the world if and only if magic is seeping out of the world.
Right.
Yeah.
I kind of like to reframe it as, because there's something that's weird about saying that, like, I want to believe this thing. If it's a bad thing, I mean, like, I would say I want to believe it because then I can point my efforts towards, like, doing something about it. Right?
Yeah, but you have to believe that it's a problem before you can do something.
Yeah,
about
I
it.
just like adding that there because, like, if you just say, I want to believe bad things, it's a weird thing to convince yourself of.
Oh.
I have a good example, and I think it's a good note to end on. But first, for next time, be sure to read Meditation on Curiosity and Single Think. And my note to end on with the Litany of Tarski is, I think that it's an easy example for many people to think of, especially people with, you know, raised on stupid ideas of masculinity, is like, if you're sick, you know, a lot of people put off going to the doctor. Oh, I'll be fine. Or maybe it's nothing, right? Instead, if you think this might be a problem, instead of being scared away from, like, oh man, if it's something I don't want to, people think, I've caught myself thinking, I don't want that to be true.
Right.
And so, like,
if it's true, it already
I don't
is.
want to face if this is, like, cancer. or-
exactly. But if it is, you want to know, you want to believe it before, you know, you want to believe it as soon as possible.
If it's cancer, it is cancer, whether or not I believe it.
Exactly.
And I want to believe it.
And you want to catch cancer early.
Yeah.
is the
Right.
thing, and do something about it before it becomes metastasized.
Yeah. To that effect, I have a friend who so if you're pitching this, I've got a request to everybody. I put this out in the Bayesian Conspiracy Discord yesterday or the day before, and I figured, hey, let's hit a slightly larger audience. I have a friend who has a grade 4 high grade glioma, which is a brain tumor. They went and operated out about 85% of it. But basically, short version, the prognosis isn't good. This is not one of the good cancers to get, even as far as brain cancers go. So if anyone works and you know, we've talked to a lot of interesting people on this show. You know, we talked with, you know, Robert McIntyre, you know, who is like the only person in the world doing what he does. We hit some fringe audiences with, like, the edge of science. And while I realize that the odds of, you know, anyone listening knowing the cure for brain cancer is small. If anyone has any ideas or knows anybody who's working on some cutting edge, fringe science almost sounds like pseudoscience, but I mean like, clinical trial stuff, anything that's about to accept humans and isn't yet because it's that early, anything at all, or knows anyone who might, please shoot me an email at, is it Bayesian Conspiracy Podcast at gmail.com?
Yeah.
And I'll get back to you. I really appreciate it. And I can't think of a more succinct way to put it. So, anyway,
Yeah, fuck cancer.
indeed. All right. Well, on a happier note, we'll be back. Actually, I've got a quick question before our next episode, because we both read the same article and came to different conclusions on it.
Okay.
And this will be a teaser for people to think about going into the next episode.
All right.
How do you think about and define hate? Because I feel like that's really important to our interpretations of this article.
I define hate as an emotion that you feel that is similar to anger, but with more loathing and impetus to do something mixed in.
Okay. All right. Do we want to tell people what we're reading for next week? What the post is called?
No, let's keep it teasing.
All right. Let's not let them think about it until we tell them what to think about it.
That's exactly. This should be a one-way channel of information from us to the listener.
Perfect. Oh, we've got a patron to thank.
We do have a patron to thank. Our patron this week is Daniel Nadolny?
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel Nadolny. Thank you very much for supporting us, for helping everybody bring the good news of Satan to our listeners. We hope that we have spent your donation in a good way.
I hope he agrees too. Thanks, Daniel. You rock.
Thank you.
All right. We'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about hate. I'm very excited.
Yeah, me too.
All right.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye, everybody.